Hello, friends. So I'm back again, this time with the part 4 of the invasion of India by Alexander of Macedon. In the past three episodes, we had looked at Alexander's advance towards the Indus River. In the second part, we had seen Alexander's famous battle with Porus on the banks of Jhelum. And in the third part, we had looked at Alexander's retreat after conquering many neighboring kingdoms and republican states. So, this is the concluding part of this series on Alexander's invasion of India. We would look at three parts here. The first part would be the causes of defeat of Indians in front of the Greek invasion. Why did it happen? In the second part, we would look at the causes, the problems which Alexander was facing in India. And the third part, we would just look at the mention of Alexander in Indian inscriptions and Indian literature. So we'll start with the quote by Alexander. And this is what he says about his teacher Aristotle. So I'm indebted to my father for living, but to my teacher for living well. So this is for every great man. Every great man has a great teacher with him. In Indian context, it can be said that Chandragupta Maurya was a great Indian emperor. His guru was Kautilya. So every great man will have a great teacher with him. It happened with Alexander, and in Indian context, it happened with Chandragupta Maurya. So we'll start with the causes of defeat of the Indians first. And one of the main things about the Indian armies, Indian states, which Alexander conquered, before them, they were small republican states and kingdoms. And when they fought Alexander, the proportion of their army was very large in compared to what their total population was. So you had Aglosoi, which had 40,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. And these guys, the Maskawati people, the Ashwanayas, they all fought to a man. Even their women participated in the defense of their country. So they employed every person who was capable of holding arms into their national defense system. And if their heroic fight, and it was very heroic fight in front of perhaps the greatest general of antiquity. And why it failed? Because it lacked leadership. There was no one particular leader. It lacked organization as well, and it lacked unity of direction. And it, in other words, it lacked unity. The states, these republicans and other small Indian kingdoms, they were basically independent. They viewed themselves as culturally, yes, integrated, but they could not believe that if Alexander had crossed Indus, it is time for unity, to show unity, to mass their armies, to have the pooling of resources, and to confront Alexander with all their might. And this is the problem which India has been facing or has faced over the past 1,000 years, where a lot of invaders from northwest, particularly from Afghanistan, Iran, and even the British, when they came, there was no unity. These small kingdoms thought themselves as independent states, and many of them sided with the invaders. It has not happened only in British time or in Mughal time. It happened way back when Alexander's armies crossed the Indus. So we have kings like Shashigupta, we have kings like Ambhi, even Porus. Porus helped Alexander in the conquest of the Kathas, Katha tribe, who were living near the Chenab, the Ravi River. And he helped Alexander in the conquest of that region with 5,000 of his troops. So all these kings, even the king of Kashmir, all these kings were, in order to have more kingdom, more territory under them, they helped the invader. And what does an invader want? He wants his path to be cleared, to be eased, and that is what they achieved. And it happened first time when Alexander invaded India. So, and secondly, the defense was far too localized. Alexander was getting into trouble, but he was able to conquer one territory, post his governors there, and move on to the next territory. There was no idea of a national defense. These they had there been, which happened 20 odd years later when Seleucus Nicator tried to cross the Indus. He did not face small republican kingdoms and tribes. He faced a united army, a united India under one king, and he had to retreat, or he had to accept his defeat. So that was not the case with Alexander. He would conquer one region, move to another, conquer that, move another. That's what was going on. And that's what I said, I mean, he was able to deal with the defense piecemeal, to proceed against one state and subdue them easily. That was the issue with Alexander. Now, Alexander, uh, Alexander, we will just look at the problems faced by Alexander now. So, from the beginning, the course of Alexander's invasion did not run smooth. It appeared that everything was going on smoothly. Alexander was able to conquer one region, post his governors, his soldiers, then move on to another region. But it appeared only smooth on paper. It difficulties actually lay deeper. So one of the things was Alexander was not sure about his rear. Friends, Alexander's supply line stretched from Iran up till Indus and beyond. That was as a distance of more than three, 2,500 kilometers easily. And if there was a rebellion, then he was in trouble because his supply line will get threatened. So and it was threatened, first the Indians and then by Greeks themselves. And the thing about is that we'll look at this map first of all, and we will go through this in detail a little bit. This is the map of northwestern India when Alexander had just left the country. You could see lots of Alexandrias and even parts like Sogdiana and Bactria. So we'll just look at this just a little bit later. But so these are the administrative arrangements of Alexander in India. So the administrative arrangements which Alexander employed betrays his own sense of security. So he divided Greek India into six satrapies, three on the west side of Indus and three on the east side of Indus. So we'll just look at this map again now. So you can see easily the Indus River flowing near Taxila, and on the west side of it he had three satrapies, and on the east he had three satrapies. So he divided Greek India into six particular satrapies. Now his policy was to plant colonies of Greek veterans at his newly conquered eastern cities as to mark the progress of his conquest. So such colonies were first set up in Bactria, that is the portion of northern Afghanistan and parts of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. And then in Sogdia, you can clearly see Sogdia, yes, Sogdiana near Markanda is there. This is near modern day Uzbekistan. So these colonies were first established there, but it was difficult for these colonies or the colonists, and they did not want their life to end as an exile. Alexander actually thought these colonies as some kind of penal settlements. So these colonists were always longing for an opportunity to desert. So when Alexander received a wound, we had discussed this last time. He received a arrow injury on his right lung while he was fighting the Malwas near modern Multan, and a rumor of his death spread far and wide. So these colonists, numbering about 3,000, who were staying in Bactria and Sogdiana, they immediately started leaving for Greece. And Alexander, as I said earlier, he thought of these colonies as a penal settlement, and because he wanted to stifle out any opposition against his rule, and but the issue was the attitude of the Indians of those days. The spirit of revolt was not subdued even after suffering defeat after defeat on battlefield against Alexander. So Alexander of the Western Satrapies, and we had discussed this a little bit when we were dealing with Chandragupta Maurya. So Pithon, general of Alexander, was posted as the governor of Sindh, and Nicanor, another general, was posted in charge of a province called India west of Indies. Uh, and the capital of India west of Indies was Pushkalavati, which was the second capital of Gandhara in those days. And Oxyarites was appointed governor of Kabulwali. Oxyarites was the father-in-law of Alexander, and he was appointed simply because the previous governor, whom Alexander had appointed, he was caught taking bribes and doing other things. So Alexander removed him and put his father in his place. So these but we can look at now the eastern side, which will just go to the map again. So the eastern side, which is Takshashila and all other places, Takshashila, Sagala, and this compassed a region from the Indus to the Bias River. So these three satrapies on the east side of Indians of the Indus River were all governed by the Indians. So in Ambi was ruling between Indus and Jhelum. Now we have Porus, who was ruling from Jhelum to Bias, and the rest were divided into small kings like the king of Kashmir. So all this trouble was brewing in about 326 BCE, when Alexander was busy fighting in thick of his campaigns in the Punjab, and what was happening near behind his back was the position of all these three Greek governors on the west side of Indus. They became rather precarious. So first Arachosia, which is modern Kandahar, now that area rebelled. There was a leader whom the Greeks called Samaxus. Samaxus was an Indian, and he rebelled against the Greeks. Unfortunately, or whatever, his rebellion was put down. Samaxus was sent to Alexander. We don't know what happened to him. He must have been crucified later. After Arachosia, we have the Ashvanayas. In spite of Alexander being present in India, they killed his governor and rebelled. And then Ashwanayanas, they also rebelled and made this position of Greek satrapies on the west side of Indus very, very precarious. And this led to issues with regards to Alexander's supply lines, which were actually going from those regions which had rebelled. So, but again, as I had said earlier, there were kings, there were princes who were willing to support the invader in order to further their own personal cause. So, one of them was Sashigupta. The Greeks called him Sisycotus. So, he quashed these rebellions both at both of Ashvayanas and Ashvanayanas. He quashed both of them, and Alexander also sent him troops, and so did Philip. the governor of Takshashila. So he quashed these rebellions, and Alexander's supply line again became it was fine after that. So, but there was this issue of Alexander had to fight a lot of skirmishes, battles in the Punjab because these Indian states would not submit to him. A lot of them did not submit. They fought to a man, they died, but they did not submit. So his and due to this, there were casualties in Greek fronts as well, and this supply of men, weapons, armor was falling, and you could see that he could do nothing. He just stopped at Chenab River. He could not proceed further for a while simply because he had too many sick and injured men. They had very little weapons and they had no armor. That situation was saved from distant Iran, where a lot of men, horses, and armor and weapons were sent by the governor of that region to Alexander. So only after getting these things he was able to proceed till Bias. So the issue was that Alexander, it was all this trouble actually was brewing, and he just stopped. Only he could move after he got this reinforcement. So what was Indians thinking about this? I mean, there is a story, and I'll just share this with you. And this is a story of a leather hide. So what happened was there was this Indian sadhu. Uh, Alexander was very fond of philosophy and all these things, so he always met these sadhus. Many of them he had met and discussed philosophy and other things. And one of these actually conveyed very cleverly what Indians thought of Alexander's march or invasion of India. Friends, you should know that there are no mention of Alexander's invasion of India in Indian sources. Whatever it is there, whatever in this series or whatever you have read, it is from the Greek sources only. We do not have any mention of any Indian sources on this invasion. So what he this coming back to the story, what this sadhu did, he put a dry hide and stepped on one part of it. So the other part was, he asked actually Alexander to tread on one part of this dry leather hide. Alexander has stepped, the other part flew up. When Alexander put his foot on the other part, the first part flew up. So what was going on? So this Alexander actually was shown a visible image of what this his strange enterprise of conquering the world was. The uncertain and unstable consequence of campaigning carried on in region too far from the center of his dominions. That is what this story of Leatherhide tells us. You have to be in the center of your dominions in order to control both ends. If you are at one end, that is India, the other side may try to rebel because you are not there. So you have to be on the center of your dominion in order to control your vast empire. And this is what this story of the Leatherhide tells us. But coming back to why, I mean, Indians thought of this as a spectacular march through the country, and they did not care what was going on. I mean, the rest of the country, not the Northwest, they had to suffer a lot. And it has been clearly conveyed by, I'll just take a quote from Matthew Arnold in his poem Obermann Once More. The east bowed down before the blast in patient deep disdain. She let the legions thunder past and plunged in thought again. So this is what Indians of those time may have thought of what Alexander campaign was, and it has been conveyed to us by Matthew Arnold in his poem Obermann Once More. So I'll just look at the last part here now, the Alexander in Indian literature and inscriptions. So the first is Ashoka's inscription, which names Alikasudara. So this is in Brahmi. The inscription is in Brahmi. Uh, so that is what Indian used to call Alexander at Alikasudara. The Sanskrit, his name would be Alakshendra. But Ashoka was not mentioning Alexander of Macedon or Alexander the Great. He was mentioning Alexander II of Epirus. But this is the first time the name of Alexander or Alexudara comes into any Indian inscription. His name is also mentioned in Milind Pahano. Milind Pahano is a 2nd century BCE text which deals on King Meander and his questions to a Buddhist monk named Nagasena. So this text also mentioned Alexander. And of course, we have Harsha Charitra. So Harsha Charitra has been composed by Banabhatta. It's a eulogy of Emperor Harsha, who ruled most of North India between 606 to 648 CE. And in Harshcharitra, Harshcharitra is actually the first biography of any Indian king, written by his court poet, of course. So he mentions Banabhatta actually mentions the Alexander in his context with his encounter with the Amazonian warriors. So these Amazonian warriors actually were uh, it's a kind of a mythical kingdom which is ruled by women only. And the story goes that Alexander met this queen of the Amazons, and she wanted to have a child with him so that the child would also be as famous as Alexander. Alexander did try to have children with her, but sources indicate, or this is a part of Alexandrian romance. Then he sent this queen back with gifts and all. So this thing has been mentioned by Banabhatta in Harshicharitra. So these are some of the mentions of Alexander in Indian texts and inscriptions. Uh, so friends, this is all I have for Alexander and his invasion of India, and this is a very informative thing for me as well to share with you. Lots of things even I did not know, and it was great having this podcast regarding Alexander's invasion of India. And I thank you all for all your support, cooperation, all your questions, anything. You can contact me in the comment section or follow me on Twitter account. The description box has the account name. And I'll be back next week with another episode on Indian history. And till then, I wish you all good luck, and I'll be back again next week. Thank you so much.